Hey everyone, my name's Shanice and welcome back to my channel. It's been a couple of weeks and I'm here to review all the books that I read in March. Honestly, it was a pretty slow reading month for me. I ended up reading 5 books, so not as many as before, but they were longer. One of them especially was very long. So I guess in page count it was maybe around the same amount that I had read in prior months, but again, just 5 books. And let me just show you a quick little showing of the pile. So without further ado, I will start, I guess, with Spring by Karl Ove Knausgaard, which wasn't the first one that I finished, but it's on the top of the pile, so why not? This one was translated from the Norwegian by Ingvild Berkey, and it includes illustrations by Anna Bjørger. I believe that's how you pronounce it. So I'll just show you. It always is such a beautifully constructed and compiled book. His books in his seasonal quartet. I've already read Autumn and Winter. Each of the books just includes a lot of artwork in it, illustrate a lot of his points, or just for the atmosphere. So yeah, these absolutely gorgeous paintings are included. Sometimes they take up both pages. It's beautiful. So unlike the other 2 books that I have read in this quartet, which were more vignettes heavy and they had more meditations on single themes, single objects, this one turns prosaic. In this book, the unborn child that Knausgaard was writing to in Autumn and in Winter has been born, and Karl is recounting essentially a day in his life as a new father during a very traumatic time in his life. And so even though in present time the events take place in a day, he is reminiscing to a while back while his wife was still pregnant with that unborn daughter that is now born. And so through his extensive digressions, we learn about what his wife was going through while she was pregnant with their daughter. And this is very hard to read in some parts because of how honest Knausgaard is. He can be very cruel and selfish in his thinking and his speculation of why his wife is feeling a certain way. But I think it shows a level of self-awareness now that he's able to be so forthright in his telling of this story, because I feel like other authors would maybe sugarcoat what they were really feeling, but here he's very honest. So it's very harsh to read those parts. There's very frank talk of depression and self-harm in this book, so just be aware of that. There are a lot of themes of rebirth and life, alongside the discussions of self-harm and suicide. A lot of talk of art, especially Ingmar Bergman, who Knausgaard really loves. There's a section in this book that's almost like the newer movie called Bergman Island, which I really liked, where essentially Knausgaard and his wife go to where Bergman lived, in his little island, and like explore it and spend a few days there. It's like a resort now, or like a museum, which is kind of what happens in the movie Bergman Island, not the documentary, but the latest movie with Tim Roth. So in the end, I gave this around 3.5 to 4 stars. I was just really captivated. It actually is a reaffirmation of life in the end. I do want to read the last few lines because it kind of embodies that, and it's just a very beautiful way to end such a retrospective kind of book. And this he's writing directly to his daughter. So he says, "Sometimes it hurts to live, but there is always something to live for. Could you try to remember that?" And I would say that the way I feel about this is maybe how others feel about The Alchemist, by Paulo Coelho, which I don't like. But this has that like philosophical base to it, that just makes you think about life and about your choices and all of that. Again, really reaffirms the joy of living. The next book in that pile that I finished, actually happened to finish right after Spring, and it's called Madama Sui by Augusto Roa Bastos. And this author is from Paraguay, and This hasn't been translated into English yet, although I feel like it really should be. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, and beware, there are many 3.5 stars in the month of March for me, which is not a bad thing. So, to put it briefly, this is about a woman who goes by the moniker Madama Sui. She is mixed race. Her mother was Japanese and her father was from Paraguay. Her mother was born in Japan and she was one of the victims of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and she made her way to Paraguay to this place called Manora, and that's where she met Madama Sui's father. And so Madama Sui was raised in Manora, which had a lot of, other Japanese immigrants. So she was always close to half of her cultural background. She never felt lost about who she was. And so unfortunately, her parents do die in an attack on the city. And so she is raised by, I want to say, her aunt. I think it's her aunt or like a great aunt or a family member who still lived there and survived. And so we essentially follow Madama Sui, who we know dies very young. We follow all her activism for women in Paraguay, for sexual freedom, for her role and her enjoyment of her own body and sensuality and sexuality. I want to compare this to Our Lady of the Night by Mayra Santos Febres, and yeah, this features two very similarly strong women who maybe turn the trope of like a brothel, of female sexuality, of a prostitute, and actually show how much power can come with that too. So yeah, I like reading this, some parts kind of dragged on and you don't really get the weight of it, at least for me, until after you finish reading. It wasn't until a few days after where I realized, like, no, this book is actually really powerful. There are some passages here that maybe romanticize Japan in comparison to Paraguay and see Japan post-colonization as like this idyllic place, whereas Paraguay is like suffering under dictatorship and corruption. So I don't think the comparison is altogether true. There is some exaggeration, but I think at the core of it is just an author here who wishes the best for his country, and sees maybe other countries thriving in ways that he wishes Paraguay could. So I get the intention there. I don't think the passages about Japan are necessarily as honest as they could be. There's an agenda behind them. But otherwise, this was just very powerful to read, some beautiful passages, and I do hope for those of you who don't read Spanish that someday this gets translated into, whatever language you speak, I guess English, so you can enjoy it as well. Then I read one of my favorite books so far this year, one of my favorite short story collections now. It is No One Belongs Here More Than You by Miranda July. Absolutely love this. I gave this 4 stars, and this collection really gave me Hannah Horvath vibes. So if you don't like the show Girls and you hated every character on the show Girls, then maybe you're not gonna like this. I personally just loved this. It gave me hope that stories can be about anything, literally anything. I felt that stories can have no limits. Miranda July just manages to be so free. They seem to go nowhere, but in the end they wrap up and are complete and feel fully fleshed out. There are such specific descriptions, the humor is so specific, the voice is so refined. Most of my favorite stories were in the first half. I really liked The Shared Patio, I liked Majesty, I liked Something That Needs Nothing. There were many in here. Now, she does push boundaries. There are some stories here that could be read as kind of offensive. There's one called The Moves, there's another one called The Sister. There are some pretty horrible characters in here who do horrible things and are narrating what they're doing with no shame whatsoever. But I never got the sense that like Miranda July was condoning anything that they were doing. It was almost like the tone of the show Succession, where all the characters are horrible and are doing horrible things, but the joke is almost that those characters lack so much self-awareness of their cruelty that they don't know that what they're doing is wrong. And so we know it's funny, but they don't. And I feel like that's what's going on in here, or at least that's how I read it. Of course, you don't have to think that if you pick this up. But yeah, I just thought this was sharp, hilarious, original, and I loved it. It was so refreshing to read, to pick up a story each day. Just had a blast. So yeah, 4 stars for this one. And then the next one I ended up not rating because I am not skilled at analyzing poetry at all. I'm still not going to shy away from reading it. I want to challenge myself. I'm going to grow as a reader. But I'll be honest, I am not going to say I fully understood every single poem. But this one is by Richard Seiken, and it's called Crush. My honest opinion is that sometimes I felt lost in some of the imagery being described. It felt like it was just convoluted and going places that maybe make sense to other people, but to me it just was hard to visualize. But there were moments that were beautiful, undeniably. Just the wordplay, the exquisite language, it was there. But it was like a linguistic maze. Like sometimes I felt like I was hitting a wall too often and not moving past it, not getting to the finish line. But I don't doubt that Richard Seiken is very talented. I just think maybe I just need more guidance in poetry in the end. But I will read some examples when the writing really worked and I understood it. There was one description that I just remember really vividly, is that history is like a little man in a brown suit describing a room that he's not in. Who am I? I'm just a writer. I write things down. I walk through your dreams and invent the future. The light is no mystery. The mystery is that there is something to keep the light from passing through. Here are the illuminated cities at the center of me, and here is the center of me, which is a lake, which is a well that we can drink from, but I can't go through with it. I just don't want to die anymore. So, yeah. Yes, there's beautiful language, but I am ill-equipped to review poetry, essentially. And the last book that I finished is the longest book for me, and I am so glad that it's over. It is Middlemarch by George Eliot. I ended up giving this a very generous 3 stars. It started off well, okay? In general, we have Dorothea, who's an idealist. She wants to fight for the poor, the laborers in her city of Middlemarch, the farmers, those that, make no money, slave all day, and get no credit for anything that they're doing. They get cheated, and they can't have access to education, all of that. She wants to be the savior of all of them. For inexplicable reasons, she falls in love with this ancient but scholarly man named Mr. Casaubon, who is dry as a desert. No idea why she's interested in him. Then, on the other hand, we have this other couple of Rosamond. She is supposed to be like the more vapid woman who isn't idealistic. She kind of just wants to keep her wealth, to focus on beauty, and those things are not necessarily bad, but they're presented as negative things here in comparison to someone like Dorothea. And so she ends up falling in love with this other guy named Lydgate, who is a very also dry and scholarly doctor. And so throughout the course of the novel, obviously these 2 women sort of fall out of love with the men that they're with. And it's quite a long story. We meet everybody in this town of Middlemarch. We meet people's parents, people's great-grandparents. There's a lot of fighting about wills, about marriages, about money, about keeping wealth, about medicine, about education, about just many things. George Eliot does write about these things with such confidence and such knowledge. She was clearly an intelligent person, but sometimes reading it, it just felt so dense and also just as dry as Lydgate and Kasaban. Half the time I just wasn't that interested in picking it back up because it was kind of predictable what was going to happen. The casual anti-Semitism didn't help whatsoever. And though I do admire Dorothea's idealism and her convictions, a lot of times these characters, including Dorothea, it just felt like reading people saying like, gosh, I hate being rich. It's so difficult being rich. I just want to be poor because it's so much more humble. I hate being rich. And it's like, ugh, please give me a break. Stop glorifying being poor like you suddenly are a better person because you're poor. Some things in here I just couldn't really get along with. I did like the character of Mary in here and who she ends up with. I liked their bond. I thought they were maybe the most genuine couple in here. But yeah, overall, I'm just gonna give it 3 stars. I am proud of myself for finally completing this beast. I can check it off, say I've read it, and I have completed my big book challenge for March. And in April, now that I'm reading my big book, it's going so much better than with Middlemarch. So yeah, glad I gave it a try. Unfortunately, just was not really for me. And that is all. Thank you once again for watching. Let me know what you managed to read in March, hopefully more than me, and I will see you all next time. Bye.